I never thought I'd hear the words, "We miss you," coming from the people who made me feel like I was nothing more than a burden. The night I left, I didn't feel a sense of finality, just relief. Little did I know that years later, their words would carry more weight than I ever expected. I'm Emily, and at the age of 16, I was kicked out of my home. It wasn't the dramatic, fiery argument you might imagine, but rather a slow burn of frustration, resentment, and feelings of abandonment. My parents had always been distant, but when I reached my breaking point, when I started speaking up for myself, they decided I wasn't worth the effort anymore. They gave me a choice: conform to their expectations or leave. I chose the latter. Being a teenager without the safety net of family was terrifying. I moved in with friends, bounced between couches, and worked odd jobs to get by. I hated feeling like I was less than anyone else, but over time, that hate turned into fuel. I was going to make it on my own, no matter what. But the hardest part wasn't the sleepless nights or the lonely days, it was the hole that grew inside me, one I couldn't quite name. I wanted my parents to love me, even if they didn't show it. Fast forward to today, and I've built a life for myself. I've found success in ways I never imagined, and through the struggle, I've learned to value myself. But there's still something unsettling about the unexpected message I received from my parents, years after they kicked me out. They said they missed me. They said they were proud of what I had achieved. And while I want to feel triumphant, I can't shake the confusion. Why now? Why after everything that happened? Would you like to continue with the next section, or make any adjustments here? When I first left home, it wasn't with a sense of strength or defiance. It wasn't even with a desire to prove a point. It was survival. I had no idea where I would go or what I would do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in a place where my existence felt like a mistake. The emotional scars my parents left on me ran deep. They didn't support my dreams, dismissed my feelings, and often compared me to the kids of their friends, always falling short of their impossible standards. But leaving was still one of the hardest decisions of my life. At first, I thought I would be fine. I would go to school, find a job, and get through the days. But then came the loneliness, the silent, suffocating kind that feels like an elephant sitting on your chest. The empty nights in the places I stayed, often in spaces that were not mine, with people who didn't understand my pain. At 16, the world felt like a hostile place, and while I tried to mask my hurt with fake confidence, I was barely holding on. I quickly learned the harsh reality of being on your own: bills, food, and school all stacked up like towering mountains, each one more difficult to climb. But I was determined. I threw myself into my studies, took any job that came my way, and pushed myself harder than I ever had before. It wasn't just to survive, it was to prove to myself that I was worthy of something more. Even if I couldn't gain my parents' approval, I could earn my own respect. During those difficult years, I met a few people who became more of a family to me than my own ever had. There was Jenna, a girl I met in my sophomore year of high school, who was always the first to share her lunch when I didn't have enough money for mine. She didn't ask questions, never judged me, and gave me the kind of support I had been longing for. Then there was Marcus, a guy I worked with at a local diner, who took me under his wing when he saw me struggling. He was older and had his own rough past, but he saw something in me, something worth fighting for. He taught me how to budget, how to get my first apartment, and gave me advice that I carried with me long after I left that job. These people weren't just friends, they were a lifeline. They helped me rebuild the fragments of my life that had been shattered by my parents. Through their support, I started to believe in myself again. But even as I forged new relationships, the deep void left by my parents never quite went away. There was always a part of me that wanted them to recognize the person I had become, not the angry, rebellious teen they had kicked out, but someone strong, resilient, and capable of making it on her own. But I knew the day would come when I would have to face them again. I had made a name for myself in my career, slowly climbing the ranks, and my achievements started catching the attention of those around me, including my parents. They had no idea how much I had changed, how much I had grown. To them, I was still just a child who didn't listen to their rules, a failure who would never amount to anything. But I was different now. And when they finally reached out to me after all those years, the question wasn't whether I would respond, it was how I would respond. Even now, I find myself struggling with the weight of that decision. I've come so far on my own, learned to depend on myself, and found a sense of worth that doesn't hinge on anyone else's approval. But the unresolved pain lingers, and the question of whether or not to let them back in, or if I even wanted them back in, was a battle I didn't expect to have. I'm not sure when it happened, when I stopped hoping my parents would change and started believing in my own ability to shape my future. Maybe it was when I finally moved into my own apartment, or when I got my first real promotion at work. Each milestone made me feel like I was finally free from the shadow of their rejection. And yet, as much as I tried to erase them from my life, a small part of me always wondered, could things have been different? Every success felt bittersweet. There was no "good job, Emily," or "I'm proud of you" from them, and while I convinced myself I didn't need it, the absence of their praise was loud. It wasn't just their acknowledgement I wanted, it was their love. And that's the part that haunted me. The message came unexpectedly, a simple text one evening that read, "We miss you. We see how successful you've become. We're proud of you." The words themselves weren't shocking, but the timing was. They had never cared to show any real interest in my life, let alone express pride. It stung in ways I couldn't quite put into words. Would you like to continue with the next part of the story or make any adjustments to this section so far? At first, I didn't know how to react to the text. It felt like a sucker punch coming out of nowhere. I stared at the message for what felt like hours, unsure of whether to reply or just let it linger in the void. I wanted to feel triumphant, like I had won some unspoken battle between us, but instead, I was paralyzed by confusion. Why now? After all these years of silence, why reach out now that my life was finally on track? Was this really pride, or just guilt creeping in after they saw what I had built without them? I told myself I didn't need them to validate my success, that I had worked hard for every achievement without needing their approval. But when I sat down to really think about it, I realized that my success was never just about the work, it was about proving to them, and to myself, that I was worthy of something better. If I had been honest with myself, I'd spent years trying to prove I was more than the disappointment they had always seen me as. But the weight of their message was heavier than I had anticipated. It was like a door I had locked long ago suddenly creaking open. I thought I had buried the pain of their rejection deep enough to forget, but it came rushing back in full force. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to confront them, and the only way to do that was to answer their message. I typed a response, my fingers trembling as I did, but before I could hit send, I stopped. Was I ready for this? Was I prepared to re-enter a world where my worth was constantly questioned? Where love came in the form of ultimatums? What would it mean to reconnect with parents who had never truly been there for me? The internal struggle was torturous. Every fiber of my being screamed to ignore them, to keep my distance, to protect the life I had fought so hard to build. But a smaller part of me, one I hated to admit was still there, wondered if this could be my chance at something I had always longed for, a real family connection. I wasn't that angry, rebellious teenager anymore, but I wasn't the child who needed their love to survive either. Yet, the vulnerability they had shown by reaching out felt like a crack in the wall I had so carefully built around my heart. I spent the next few days replaying the decision over and over in my head, asking myself if I had anything left to prove. The people who truly mattered in my life, Jenna, Marcus, and the friends I'd made along the way, had supported me when no one else would. They had become the family I never thought I needed, and now I had to decide if I was willing to open the door to my biological family, a door that had remained shut for years. I struggled with the thought of letting my guard down. I had been hurt so many times, but still, the longing for something more, a true reconciliation, an honest bond, kept gnawing at me. Was it even possible? Or had too much time passed, and too much damage been done for things to ever truly be repaired? Meanwhile, I began confiding in my closest friends about the message. Jenna, who had always been my rock, was the first person I turned to. Her response was straightforward, as always. "You don't owe them anything," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Look at what you've built. They didn't help you get here. Why give them the satisfaction of thinking they did?" Her words stung, but they made sense. I had created my own success, and I had learned to live without their approval. Why should I let them waltz back into my life now that everything was in place? But then, there was Marcus. He was older, wiser, and had seen firsthand how the wounds of childhood rejection could shape someone. "You're not the same person you were back then," he said one evening as we sat over coffee. "But that doesn't mean you should just cut them off forever. You don't have to let them back in, but you do need to decide if you're going to carry that weight with you forever. Is it worth it to keep holding on to that anger?" His words lingered with me long after we parted ways. He was right. I could hold on to my anger, my hurt, and my disappointment forever. I had every right to. But would that make me happy? Would it give me peace? I was still angry, still resentful, but maybe it was time to let that go. Not for them, but for me. I was tired of letting the past control me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my journey had been about me finding my own worth, not waiting for anyone else to validate it. I had been so focused on proving myself to my parents, trying to gain their approval, that I forgot what I truly needed. I didn't need them to see me as successful. I needed to see myself as worthy, independent, and strong, with or without their acknowledgement. But still, a part of me wasn't ready to just forget everything. So, I made the decision to meet them, not to reconcile right away, but to see if I could face them as the person I had become, not the child I used to be. I wasn't going to seek their approval, but I was curious to see if I could find a new kind of relationship with them, one built on mutual respect instead of past disappointments. The day of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves. I put on my best, "I've got everything under control" face, but inside, I was terrified. What if they hadn't changed? What if they still saw me as a failure? What if this whole thing was just a ploy to make them feel better about what they had done? As I made my way to their house, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come in my own life. I had found love in the friendships I had built, love that had nothing to do with blood. I was proud of the woman I had become, strong, capable, and unafraid to stand up for herself. I had learned that success wasn't just about money or status, it was about the people who stood by you, the ones who supported you through the hardest moments. In a way, I had already built the life I had always wanted. Maybe this meeting wasn't about fixing the past, it was about closing the door on something that had been weighing me down for far too long. The real question now wasn't whether they would accept me. It was whether I was ready to let them back in. But even as I approached their front door, the stakes felt higher than ever. The walls I had built up, the emotional armor I had worn for so long, would be tested in that moment. Could I let them see the person I had become? Could I be vulnerable without risking everything I had worked for? And most importantly, was I prepared for the possibility that even after all this time, they might still be the same people who kicked me out, who never believed in me? Would you like to move on to the climax, or make any changes here? As I stood at the doorstep, my hand hesitating on the doorknob, a flood of emotions washed over me. It felt like everything I had worked so hard to bury, my anger, my resentment, and all the pain from those years of neglect was bubbling up, threatening to overwhelm me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This wasn't just about confronting my parents, it was about confronting the parts of me that had always felt abandoned, unworthy, and insignificant. The person who had come so far, built a life on her own, was standing here now, unsure if she should even open the door. But I did. I turned the knob and stepped inside. The house was just as I remembered, familiar yet foreign. It was as though no time had passed, but everything felt different. The walls were adorned with family pictures, the place unchanged, like they had preserved the past as if I hadn't left. My parents were sitting in the living room, both of them stiff in their seats, almost as if they were waiting for something or someone. My mother's eyes were wide with something I couldn't quite place, and my father, as usual, looked like he was trying to hold his emotions back, pretending to be unaffected. We sat in silence for a moment, each of us unsure of what to say, and then my mother broke the silence. "We've missed you," she said, her voice soft and almost tentative. "I know we've made mistakes, but we've been watching you. You've done well for yourself." I felt my heart race at her words. They were so simple, but they felt loaded. She was apologizing without directly saying it, trying to fill the gap that had existed between us for so long. But I couldn't ignore the years of hurt. The empty birthdays, the missed school plays, the silence when I needed them most. Could a simple apology fix all of that? I looked at my father. His gaze met mine briefly, before he looked away. It was in that moment I realized something. Their apology wasn't what I had been waiting for. It wasn't going to heal the wounds. What I needed to hear wasn't coming from them. It wasn't about them changing. It was about me choosing to let go of the hurt. I had spent so many years looking for validation from them, and now I understood that I had built my life without it. I was enough, with or without their approval. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I appreciate that you're proud of me. But the truth is, I've been proud of myself for a long time. I've built this life, this success, because I believed in me, not because I ever thought you would. The words were raw, but they felt like a release. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. My father shifted uncomfortably, his lips tight. We didn't mean to hurt you, Em. We did what we thought was best at the time. But I interrupted him, gently. I know. I don't blame you anymore. But you can't expect me to just forget everything that happened. I've changed. And I'm not the same person you once knew. There it was. The painful truth. They had been expecting some magical reunion, an instant fix for years of neglect and emotional distance. But that wasn't how it worked. Healing wasn't instant. It was slow. It was messy. It was uncertain. There was a long pause. Then my mother spoke again, this time with more conviction. We were wrong to kick you out. And we've been regretting it for years. We should have been there for you, but we didn't know how. We're sorry, Emily. We truly are. For the first time, I saw genuine regret in their eyes, but it wasn't enough to undo the past. I had always wanted them to acknowledge the pain they caused, and now that they were, I felt nothing like I thought I would. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel the rush of triumph. All I felt was peace. A peace I had fought for, not from them, but from myself. They were sorry, yes. But my journey had never been about their apology. It had always been about me learning to forgive myself for holding onto the past for so long. In that moment, I realized that the closure I had been searching for wasn't going to come from their acknowledgement. It was going to come from letting go of the need for it altogether. I had already closed that chapter in my life. I didn't need them to make things right because I had already made peace with what had happened. I stood up, my decision clear in my heart. I appreciate your apology, I said, my voice steady. But I'm not coming back. I'm okay. I'm better than okay. And I think it's time for both of us to move forward. And with that, I walked out the door. The decision to leave had been painful, but the decision to return on my own terms was liberating. I had found a new sense of family, a new sense of self, and I was finally ready to leave the past behind. Would you like to continue with the falling action or make any adjustments here? As I drove away from my parents' house that day, the weight on my chest felt lighter than it had in years. It wasn't because I had gotten the apology I thought I wanted. It was because I had finally realized that I didn't need it. I didn't need them to make up for the past. I didn't need to spend another moment replaying the hurt they had caused me. I had already moved on. In fact, the moment I let go of the anger was the moment I truly set myself free. I didn't expect it to be easy. The lingering feelings of abandonment, the memories of sleepless nights and quiet mornings spent alone, they didn't just disappear. But in letting go of the idea that my parents owed me something, I found peace. I no longer sought validation from them. I had been seeking it from myself all along. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle changes in how I viewed my own life. The self-doubt that had crept in during my earlier years, when I wondered if I was good enough or if I had made the right choices, began to dissipate. I felt a sense of completeness, a sense of pride in the life I had built on my own. I had come so far, and I didn't need anyone else to tell me that. The days following the meeting with my parents were quiet, but there was a peace in that silence. I spent more time with Jenna, Marcus, and the other people who had helped me grow. We laughed, we shared stories, and we built memories. I realized just how much I had gained from the relationships I had cultivated over the years. My family wasn't defined by blood, it was defined by the people who showed up, who cared, who helped me when I needed it most. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, the soft glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room, I thought back on everything. I thought about the teenage girl who had left her home, unsure of where she was going but determined to survive. I thought about the tears I had shed, the nights I had spent wondering if anyone would ever love me, and the day I realized that love had to come from within. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I was proud of myself, not because I had built a successful career or earned anyone's praise, but because I had learned to love myself, flaws and all. I picked up my phone, debating whether to text my parents back. A simple message, just to acknowledge their words, to let them know I was okay. But then I stopped. I didn't need to tell them anything. They knew. And I knew. I was okay. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, I noticed that the relationships I had built were growing stronger. Jenna was there for me in ways my parents never had been. She celebrated my successes and offered a shoulder to lean on when things got tough. Marcus, too, was a constant presence, reminding me that I didn't have to do it all alone. I wasn't alone anymore. And that realization was the most powerful thing of all. As for my parents, they sent a few more texts and tried to call a few times. But instead of feeling like I had to choose between them and the life I had created, I realized that I could move forward without being tethered to the past. I had the option to remain cordial, to acknowledge that they were a part of my story, but they no longer had control over my happiness. I sat on my couch, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just content. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had everything I needed. The life I had fought for, the family I had built, and the woman I had become, all of it felt right. I had learned that forgiveness didn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes, forgiveness meant letting go. Letting go of the past, of the expectations, and of the pain that had held me back for so long. And in doing so, I found freedom. I looked at the sunset outside my window, the colors shifting from orange to pink, and I smiled. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been mine. And that was enough. Would you like to continue with the closing or make any changes here? As I stood by the window, watching the last light of day fade into the horizon, I realized just how far I had come. The path to this point hadn't been smooth or easy. It had been filled with heartache, disappointment, and moments when I thought I wouldn't make it. But now, there was only peace. Peace that I had built on my own terms, with the strength I had learned to embrace. I had spent years searching for closure, for something from my parents that would validate the pain I had carried. But in the end, I realized that closure wasn't something they could give me, it was something I had to give myself. And I had done that. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had learned to stand on my own, to trust myself, and to surround myself with the people who truly cared. Whether or not my parents and I ever truly reconciled didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had found my place in the world, and it was mine alone to define. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I was free. And as the last of the sunlight disappeared behind the trees, I felt a sense of hope, a hope for what the future could be, unburdened by the mistakes of the past, ready for whatever came next. This concludes the story. Let me know if you need any adjustments or additional changes.